It is weird. It's totally weird to be a creative person in this day and age, and like, what does that necessarily mean? What does the longevity for that look like? If you are the kind of person who wants to be an animator or an illustrator or graphic designer, you should also be prepared to be struggling consistently, financially and otherwise. There's also things like isolation that you don't hear about at all.
Yeah.
Like, you have to put a lot of effort into being to seeing friends and family, because by the nature of the very nature of the work, you're alone a lot. That can do some damage if you're not the kind of person with a strong enough constitution. Be prepared to understand finances, understand how taxes work, understand how contracts work. Like, these are all, so saying that you want to be an independent, employed independently or successful independently, that comes with its big hurdle too. Like, it's huge boulders you got to push up the rock. I mean, yes, being a clock watcher and doing a 9 to 5, yeah, sure, that's going to be soul sucking to a certain degree. And yes, you're going to have everything taken care of. Your taxes are taken out for you. Your health care is provided. It's all, grass is greener, right? Like,
yeah,
you're going to have your obstacles on both ends. You're going to have the pros on both ends, cons on both ends.
Hey, real quick, before this interview with Jay Torres, I want to show you something. So, Jay sent me some prints in the mail and a very nice note, and I want to share them with you. Starting with this guy here with some jazz heads, which I greatly appreciate. They're extremely high quality, like I would say museum quality prints. But check this out. This is the piece de resistance. Oh, I've been keeping it in the sleeve to keep it safe. Look at this. Oh, God. What? Man. It feels like crushed velvet. There's so much ink on this thing. Super, super high quality. Super nice of you, Jay. I'm really appreciative. I can't imagine this like museum quality print is cheap to make. So the fact that you just sent it to me out of the kindness of your heart means a lot. And it is such an awesome image. It just gives off like anime bad guy. It's just right in my wheelhouse. I just love this with the feathers and everything, and the pompadour, and smoking multiple cigarettes, and the anime bad guy glasses. Just everything about it is awesome. So I just wanted to say thank you publicly to Jay Torres for sending me these. It's such a cool thing that came from getting to talk to you and get to know you. And I'm going to send you some of my work in the mail as well. Not nearly as cool, but I got to return the favor. But let's get to the interview. This was with Jay Torres. Enjoy. Welcome to Extremely Live. I am Michael Rock and Roll, and today I am here with Jay Torres, Multimedia Illustrator, to talk about his life and his career and all the cool stuff he's working on. Welcome, Jay. I appreciate you doing the show.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. This is super fun already.
Wow! Right off the bat, right out the gate. So yeah, we have a mutual contact. He gave me a list of people I should talk to, and I started going through. I'm like, oh, this guy's work is really cool. So I hit you up. And now here we are. So
yeah,
I don't know a lot about you other than, I do a little bit of research beforehand. I at least go on your website and check out your work and stuff. But yeah, I'd like to just get to know you a little better. I see you grew up in El Paso, Texas. I'm curious about that. Like, I have a strange relationship with Texas. My wife's family is from there. I go there all of a sudden I go there a lot more than I ever would have expected. I'm from New York State. And it's an interesting place to me. Like the color palette is like completely opposite to like the Northeast. Like it's just very night and day different. So I'm just curious about you growing up in El Paso.
Yeah, El Paso. Your wife's family, not from El Paso, but from Texas?
Yeah, just in general.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're
Dallas,
I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
El Paso is the when you picture Texas and it's got that sort of jutted out sort of tip on the west side that borders with New Mexico and Mexico, where like the furthest on that tip. So if you're taking, if you're driving from the West Coast through Texas, it's the first city you'd hit. It's also one of the, I guess, like more. It's strange because it's a very politically liberal city compared to the rest of the state. It's also a border town, so very infused with Mexican culture.
Yeah.
And then it's a desert town on top of that. So, the growing up there, the far expanses of the west side and east side were majorly underdeveloped or undeveloped. And it was just desert, so it was like this sort of big city in the middle of this vast desert, and so it continues to sort of grow outward, which a lot of cities, I don't know, really operate that way. Maybe in less developed areas like Midwest or that sort of thing. But it's just interesting because as a kid, you just jump on a freeway and drive 30 minutes from my high school. You were in the middle of nowhere, like very No Country for Old Men kind of vibe. But yeah, I loved it. I mean, it just was a matter of time before I could move out, it was just sort of like, people move out of their hometowns, but I visit often. I saw a family there, and it's still very interesting. Artistically too, it's like I said, it's a lot of Mexican culture is very much a huge part of El Paso. So the palette in like you said, you mentioned that like the colors are just so different. There's a lot of just like sort of bland beige stucco rock wall kind of thing everywhere, but then in the middle of the street will just be this bright pink or like fuchsia house. That's cool. That just sticks out. A lot of the mural work too, very vibrant and stuff. But I also grew up Catholic, so like very, very traditional Roman Catholic. Went to a private school and everything, and so had to go to church like twice a week, once at school, once with family. Yeah. And lots of ornate things, big, gaudy ceramic statues of religious figures, and like no subtlety at all.
One of my favorite like weird street art things I've seen is I don't know what they're called, but like it's like the statue of Mary, and it kind of has like a almost like a half bathtub around it.
Right.
I saw one of those, but it was Godzilla in it.
I've seen that.
Which is just awesome.
I always I see artwork, and I see when people kind of do that sort of thing, and they integrate, and I'm like, oh, grew up Catholic. I know, I can sense it.
Totally. Yeah, I also went to church a whole lot. We were kooky Pentecostal types, like so it's a little different vibe, but still very much like everything you do is related to the church, and all your friends are through the church, that sort of a thing.
Exactly.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm fascinated by Texas. I'm confused by Texas. It's an interesting place. Like
it is a confusing place.
I love the speed limit. Like just going 75 miles an hour down like a highway is incredible. That should be everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. But then you can't buy hard liquor on Sundays at most places. It's like I said, it's weird because it's primarily just sort of generally speaking, it's a red state, right?
Yeah.
But then you have these little pockets, and Paso is certainly one of them. obviously Austin, it's just the college town sort of progressive kind of place, which is great and super fun. And I have friends and family who live there. But I also do appreciate definitely the weirder, and the like very, very red parts as well.
Yeah.
Again, it's a giant state too.
Yeah.
So
that's another part.
Generalize it as one way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's super interesting. I like the people too. Like I don't know why I'm focusing so much on Texas right now, but I just think about it a lot. Like the people are in general, I think, more inviting and nice than I'm used to. In like, not that like New York people aren't nice, but it's like it takes a minute to like get to know people, and I feel like there it's like, hi, welcome, like let's be friendly right off the bat and inviting. It's just an interesting cultural kind of America's weird, man. There's so many different like just
to say the
like
least,
each state is its own country. I don't think people realize that from outside the US. It's pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
So were you born in El Paso? Are you living there?
Yeah, I was born there. My so Army brat, my
cool.
But my parents are both, well, my father was from Mexico, but my mother was born in El Paso, Texas. So she was second generation Mexican American. And grew up there and moved to Southern California in my teen years.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So didn't finish high school there. Finished high school in California. I moved between my junior and senior year, like the summer between those 2 years, which was a very interesting. That's an interesting time to transition, because you're like established, your friends and that sort of thing, and graduating, such a big deal in America, where you want to be with your close friends.
Totally.
So that was interesting, but I've lived in Southern California since then. I've moved around, but primarily LA since 2004, somewhere around there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But like I said, I go back often. I saw a family there. I saw friends there. I have friends all over the country who I grew up with in El Paso, who I end up meeting up with in El Paso, like during holidays and that sort of thing. But
sweet.
Grew up there. Grew up on an Army base, the Fort Bliss Army base, which also interesting. And like I said, went to a Catholic school. Very almost like very traditionally Texas like upbringing. And if you think about it,
my wife is also, her father's military, and literally same exact deal. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Was the move to California just like a base change or something?
No, so actually, I think I skipped over this. So my
it's all good.
Mother remarried, essentially, and so my stepfather based in LA, so moved the whole family out there.
Gotcha.
Ended up moving to a small town in Southern California called the town's called Norco, but it's shortened for North Corona. And that was interesting because that's a very rural area. I mean, I'm talking like, at least at that time, which was in the late 90s, no sidewalks, horse trails. So a lot of cowboys, a lot of ranches. And it was really funny because moving from Texas to that, I was like a punk rock kid, like piercings in my face and that kind of thing. And, moved to this town, and I literally go to high school with guys who were like spitting chew, and like, that's like not an exaggeration at all. It's so funny.
Totally.
And so people were like, you must be used to this because you're from Texas. And I was like, actually, no, El Paso is very much a sort of urban sort of area. I mean, the only time I ever saw a horse in real life was like at a circus or going to like some kind of rodeo with the family. But this was like a regular occurrence, seeing people on horseback, trotting down the street.
That's so funny.
Confederate flags too. That was the thing. I was like, I never saw a Confederate flag
until you were in California.
And then I go to California, and they're everywhere.
Yeah.
So it was that ironic sort of funny twist of fate in that sense,
It's very similar in New York. Like everyone associates the state with, obviously New York City, but like I'm from upstate New York, like 4.5 hours outside, and it's same deal, like super rural. Everybody I knew was like a dairy farmer.
Right.
Definitely more conservative. The United States is a very interesting, strange place.
And that's kind of the funny thing that, I think it's important to point out a lot is when people are like, I'm either from the West Coast or the East Coast, and it's usually associated with this sort of extreme progressive politics, but you're like, no, actually there are pockets. It doesn't operate that way.
Totally.
Maybe LA, New York, but yeah, like you said, the moment you start to go more north or whatever, the more rural areas, you're going to find those pockets. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. It's, if we can just figure out a way to get us all to get along, that'd be cool.
Yeah, exactly.
The culture war, so much fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So what were you, you're saying you're a punk rock kid. That's great. I love the idea of you being like full-blown Catholic everything with lip piercings and stuff. What sort of stuff were you consuming? Like, what were you excited about?
I'm sure other guests you've talked to, other people or, friends you got, but it's just like it's that sort of tale as old as time, right? Like, you're a weird kid. You like the stuff that no one else likes. I was never a sports kid. I was a comic books, horror movies kid. We grew up in an area that wasn't entirely, I'll just say this, not the safest place to play outside as a kid necessarily. My mother was a single mother at the time, and she was just very like, I don't want you outside. Well, how can I keep you inside? You want to go to the comic book store? We'll get you whatever you want. You want to go to the video store every other day? We'll go to the video store. And so myself and my brothers and my sister was too young, but my siblings, we would just, we'd go to the video store and we'd go through the horror movie section and just go like one by one, like we saw this last week, let's do this one now. So yeah, totally that kind of kid, which, I think with most subculture participants, I don't know how you would put that, but people who grew up in the subculture, it just feels very linear, right? It's like comic books, horror movies, punk rock music, you kind of follow this sort of just by way of being like a weird little outsider kid. Yeah. And growing up in the Catholic school, same thing. I mean, we were very like uniforms. Our teachers were, the school was connected to a convent. So all of our teachers were nuns with the full habit and everything, giant crucifixes. It was wild. And so, as a kid, it was just like, I couldn't play sports. I was not a very athletic kid. So obviously just gravitated towards that stuff, which stands to reason why I ended up becoming a professional artist as I got older.
Yeah, definitely. What comics were you reading? I'm just curious.
Oh, I mean, I was just talking about this with my wife, actually. I was obsessed with anything anything Spawn related. Loved the Spawn comics, especially just how brutal they could get. I loved basically anything DC, Image, with that sort of thing. Gotcha. I mean, of course, had my, like every other kid in the 80s and 90s, like my Marvel stuff, my, whatever, what have you, but Spider-Man, that sort of thing. But I always loved the kind of weirder stuff. I would go into our comic book store and I would just go to they had a section, and I forget what they titled it, but it was just indie. It might have just been like indie section, and so that's where I found things like Lobo. Do you remember that? Lobo comics. Yeah. That's how I found The Crow. That sort of stuff, and that was the stuff that I really got excited about.
Yeah.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even that early Peter Laird stuff was like brutal.
Yeah.
And so cool looking. The artwork. So yeah, that kind of stuff. I always kind of like the weird stuff, I think.
That's cool. I had a bunch of older brothers, so I would like get their hand me down like Image Comics or like just weird indie comics. I remember loving this issue of The Flaming Carrot that I would read over and over.
Amazing.
Yeah, my grandfather was a huge comic guy as well, and he would let us read his collection all the time. It was awesome. He's such a cool dude.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
it's
great.
like having those older people in your life to like show you the cool stuff is a good hack.
I was so jealous of that. A lot of the music that I ended up getting into later in life was usually from friends that had older siblings.
Mm-hmm.
So there were these kids who come to school and go, "Hey, have you heard this, The Cure? Do you know who The Cure is?" And I'm like, "I don't know who that is." Like, well, my brother gave me these cassette tapes. Let's listen to them. I never had that, so I would rely on my friend group to kind of introduce me a lot to stuff. Or like I said, I got comfortable quickly talking to the people who worked at the comic book store or the record store by just literally saying, "Can you recommend something?"
Yeah,
because I never had anybody to kind of usher me into that. So
totally.
Yeah, when I had a friend, and they had an older sibling, I would be terrified of them, but at the same time be like, "What did they give you this time?" Like, "Oh, like what's this comic or what's this record?" So yeah. I totally love that.
Hello, I'm Micah, creator of Extremely Live. If you're enjoying what you're watching, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend. Please, that would be amazing. Extremely Live is a podcast and a live stream that is value for value. If you're getting value out of what we're making, we ask that you send us some value in return by going to extremely.live/donate. We'll take anything. We appreciate everything. And with that, let's get back to the video. I wonder what it is about that kind of age range where everything you're into, you're like so into, like it's so exciting, like that stuff like burns into the back of your head and then just feeds everything you do from then on. But it's always that specific, I feel like, age range. It's very strange.
Yeah, it's like your brain is so ready to just it absorbs everything quickly and in such a transitional part of your life. I mean, I feel like as I am a collector still of sorts, and I still love to buy physical media, and I don't know if that's generational necessarily, but I mean, mostly I'm sure it is, but I can't. And again, talking to other friends who are similar in this regard, like I can't put my finger on exactly why we are obsessives. And I think a lot of creative people I talk to are obsessives.
Totally.
I feel like they kind of go hand in hand. You can't really be a creative person in a casual way. It's like you have to go full tilt. And I think there's also a little bit of attention deficit in there too, to a certain regard, right? Like obsessive compulsive, whatever you want to label it. But it's like, there still to this, I'm in my 40s now, and even still to this day, it's like if I find a new series or new comic series or a new graphic novel, I'm like, I need to know everything about this writer. I need to know other things that they've done. I need to find out this illustrator. So that it always stays with you. It's interesting how that works.
Yeah, for sure. Are you drawing like as a kid? Are you like spending your time indoors drawing? You mentioned.
Oh yeah.
You kind of grew up in the not the safest neighborhood, so you're inside all the time. Like what are your what does your creative output look like back then?
Yeah, it was definitely drawing. My dad, he was, I guess, artistic. He's not an artist, but pretty creative, and he would like, I'm trying to remember. He brought, I remember, a airbrush kit. He had just purchased this.
That's cool.
And I was like 11 or 12, and he was like showing me like, this is how you do. He was really good at sort of calligraphy and that kind of thing.
That's
so
cool.
He would show me how he would do that sort of style. And then I think just being into everything that I was into was like, well, I want to try to learn how to draw like this. Let me try to see if I can copy, this whatever cartoon or something I saw him, Toxic Avenger. Like, I'm going to try drawing him. And like, I would do that in class, and then, you get kids who are, or teachers and people get encouraged. But I never took it seriously. And I'm talking like well into my adulthood. It was always a hobby. And did odd jobs. I was a musician for a few years. It took me a few years to realize that I wasn't as good as I thought I was, or at least as good as the people I was around. So I did that for a long time. And it wasn't until I actually got married, and my wife, her two brothers are professional artists. And my wife also, she had gone to art school. And so she would start looking at a lot of the doodles and sketches I had lying around. And she was one who encouraged me, like, hey, you should maybe try doing something with this. And then I started slowly, gradually taking it more seriously, and little tiny things like asking friends if they were playing a show, like, hey, can I make your flyer? Like, I'll do it myself. You don't have to pay me. Or eventually that led to, hey, I'll give you $50 if you design this t-shirt for my band. And I didn't even go back to school for art specifically until I was well into my adulthood, into my 30s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'd already been practicing for my whole life, but I didn't really put it into a practice until I was already much older, you know?
Yeah, I fully relate to that. Like, I always drew, as a little kid, but again, like, there's, I don't know what the personality type is or whatever, but like, I was never of the mindset like, oh, I could turn these drawings into a career or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it was never like, art didn't seem like a real career to me. Like, as a little kid, you might like watch a movie and then imagine what it would be like to be in a movie or whatever. Like, you do that, but it's like, oh yeah, but I need to get serious. Like, what can I actually do? You know what I mean? So it wasn't, it's very similarly, I would even have long periods of just not drawing. I was always thinking of ideas, but like, I would say there was years long stretches of just me not, drawing seriously, I would say, like not setting aside time to draw for like an hour or two.
Right.
But I relate to like not really exploring it until later in life. Like, I would say like 30s for me, I would start getting a little more serious about like a creative output or something that could possibly lead to something. I ended up going into video. I got very lucky that I just randomly happened to be interested in video editing at a time where like right before the internet could handle video, I was interested in video. And then there's just like this explosion of video stuff and opportunities. And that's the like path I took. But always in the back of my mind, I wanted to make comic books. I love drawing, and it wasn't like last year I made my first like printed physical comic. It was just so much fun. It was the most fun project I've ever done. And now I'm like, can I rearrange my life a little bit to try and take in, like, I'm a freelance. I know you're freelance as well.
Right.
So it's like, is there a way I can start selling myself as I'm more of like an all-around visual designer creator type rather than just video editor? So that's my new like goal here, is to start getting more not illustration specifically, but just like some kind of visually involved projects that require me to draw more, just because it's very satisfying, meditative kind of experience. But this isn't about me. Sorry.
No, that's interesting. I just want to touch on that because so I teach as well.
Cool.
And it's something that I find myself getting into these discussions with students too about like the life of a creative designer or artist. Mm-hmm. And it's like it all falls under the same umbrella, but it's interesting, the specific practice of drawing, because it could be the sort of gestation point for a lot of creative people, where people understand like the act of doing this thing and creating the thing and bringing it into life is satisfying, but the process itself might not be the calling. You know what I mean? So like I have friends who are like insanely good drafts people, can paint and draw very realistically, but it doesn't scratch that itch for them creatively or even professionally. And then they end up into careers that aren't very different. There's creative careers, and they can look back and go, well, I never wanted to be an illustrator or a professional painter. I just wanted to make things.
Yeah.
And however that ended up sort of evolving, that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah.
And I just have always loved that. If anything, I feel like the people who stick to drawing itself as the means to an end are the weird ones. Sometimes I'm like, how am I still doing this? But really, I think it comes down to, initially when I went to school the first time as a young person, right out of high school, I was going to school for creative writing because I really wanted to just write books. That was like, just want to tell stories.
Same.
And I think, again, that's the thing too, is storytelling. That's just sort of pervasive in art in general. And then it took me essentially decades to realize, like, oh, I think my storytelling itch will only be scratched via this process, and now I'm going to do that. And who knows, maybe 10 years from now I won't be drawing anymore and I'll just be art directing, or maybe get back to writing. Really in the end, it's just like, I just want to make things, and I just want to like tell stories, however that sort of pans out. Either way, I'm still privileged to be in a position, you and I are still privileged to be in that position to be able to do that at this particular level.
Totally. I fully relate to the that's what I like. I remember having a conversation with my high school guidance counselor. I was like homeschooled up until 18, and then I went to a real public school, and they're like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I know I like stories. I want to be able to tell stories in some way, like as a video game or a comic or in film. I don't know, but like, I know I want to do something involved with storytelling. And I think you definitely need to focus on something and get good enough at that one thing to like, have a career. But I do think there is something enjoyable and even helpful of being interested in a lot of different kind of creative disciplines and exploring those things.
Absolutely.
Because everything I've done like ends up feeding into each other in like an additive process. Like I did absolutely. I did improv comedy for a long time here in New York City. I just got really into like comedy podcasts, and I'm like, I've always imagined how cool it would be to, make your own version of Tommy Boy, or, it's just those crazy 90s comedies,
Sure.
And I started exploring comedy in New York. And, through that process, I'm like, I don't know if I want to go get headshots and like beg for acting gigs. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that's really my calling or even my interest, but the comedy like lessons I learned doing all that stuff 100% feed into my editing, feed into my illustration stuff, my comic book. Like, I learned so much from doing that I could apply to all these different things. It's
absolutely.
Yeah. I just heavily relate to that, being interested in a lot of things, but having kind of like a almost vague, generic idea of like, I kind of want to do storytelling, quote unquote, like that. I fully relate to.
And it's really important, I think, like to be willing to say, like, this is all counting for experience that will ultimately feed like my output as I go forward. I think, and again, I had this conversation a lot with my students where, we're in LA County, and I would ask them, have you guys been to downtown LA? I mean, these are young kids, 19, 20. And a lot of them, they're like, no, like, I'm terrified to go. And I'm like, you're 20 minutes away from this area. How are you not, like, as a creative person, you should be exploring everything you possibly can. You should be trying out so many things, and maybe not be so married or stuck to this thing of like, I need to be great. Again, maybe this is just our current climate, or just, I think, generationally, these people are very the end result, and they want to get to it as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And I have to try to remind them, I think it's taken me 3 decades to find my footing. And in that is a lot of mistakes, a lot of maybe false starts, a lot of failure too. Mm-hmm. And you got to just kind of understand that eventually it's all going to feed into what you're doing later in life, and will strengthen that so much more. Yeah. So I think that's really important.
I agree. Like it's important to be simultaneously focused, but also open and interested to than other things that you're trying to do, I think.
Exactly.
That's cool. So you said your wife kind of encouraged you to start taking your drawing a little more seriously. What did that look like? Like, what did you start? How did you start incorporating that into your creative process or whatever?
Yeah. So, like I said, I had always been involved somehow, like making zines or, screen printing shirts for whatever band I was playing in at the time, just like as a young kid in my 20s, I was just trying to make stuff. I didn't know what I was good at. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what I wanted to continue to do. I would just say, let me try this thing out. But when I got married, obviously this is before we got married, when we first started dating, I should say. We were together for a few years before, and she started to encourage this. At the time, I was working in the fashion industry, but in the business administration sort of aspect of it. Mm. And it was a good job. I enjoyed it. I won't say who the company was, but it was a big company. And so at the time, they had offered me a promotion and said, we might want to move you to New York.
Oh, wow.
And it was a very good deal. It was like, obviously you get a cost of living raise. We put you up in corporate housing until you find an apartment, blah, blah, blah. We find you a broker. It's a whole thing. And this is before my wife and I were married, but we're living together. And I had asked her, and I was like, do you want to do this? If I do this, this becomes my career. This is the thing, because then we're in New York and we're away from friends and family, and I have this high-paying job. And she was like, I don't think you're going to be happy with that. Do you think you're going to be happy with that? And I was like, I am not happy now. I'm not happy with this job now. And then I said, you're right. I think I just need to take this thing seriously. And I made the decision to quit and go back to school. And so that's exactly what I did. I applied for, at the time, like very prestigious art school here in Los Angeles called Art Center College of Design. And spent a good amount of time basically just building a very solid portfolio to apply, and then got in. And then so essentially that became my primary focus, was the schooling for the next 4 years. And I was fortunate, being the age that I was, being a person who was, newly married, trying to just live in one of the most expensive cities in the country. And so my focus was because it was an investment. So I was like, I'm here, I'm not having a college experience. I'm here to work and to get things done, Yeah.
It'd been hilarious if you did go that route. If you're
just going to frat, an art school frat, if that exists. Yeah. And it was the best decision I could have made, because it just sort of forced me, it was 4 years of a gut check, because, I don't know if you went to art school or anything, or had art classes, but, they can be pretty demoralizing.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They're very this is not good. Do it this way. You are, and there are teachers who had very, very colorful language about it, would flat out make people break down in tears, because they were like, you are terrible, quit now, kind of, that Gordon Ramsay approach.
Yeah.
And which I don't necessarily agree with, but I appreciated it, because it was gut check time. It was like, am I cut out for this? I guess I'm going to find out now, because I've been doing it as a hobby for so long. that I've never actually been put forth in front of real professionals who are working in the industry. And am I going to make this work? And, again, hard work focused, the whole thing, it worked out. And it was an intense experience, but I'm glad I did it, And since then, I mean, I feel like my work ethic is because of that type of training. So, I have a very strict work ethic at this point now where I don't even think about it. And again, I'm also fortunate being a freelance illustrator is so niche. And I'm I'm very much early career compared to a lot of the people that I know, people who I follow. So small career, but consistent career. And even just that, I feel like that's a big hurdle to accomplish. And so, again, illustrators, especially in this day and age with AI and what have you, it's increasingly harder to get any work at all, really, as an illustrator. So every time I get a project, that's a sort of victory unto itself, So, but I still practice I still make my own personal work and, make zines, and I find my ways of just sort of again, scratching that creative itch, because being a freelance illustrator, there's not a lot of creativity in it. You have a client, you have an art director, and they're like, we need this to look like this. And you're like, okay, I can do that. I have the skill set to do that. But the things that really get my creative juices flowing are the things that I just do for myself, making zines, painting, that kind of stuff that I don't feel necessary to really share, because it's like, it's working out. It's like, you don't go to the gym and film yourself the entire time. I'm doing sit-ups now. I mean, maybe some people do, but but it's the same kind of thing. Like, you don't go to a dentist and I'm going to show you me getting 6 cavities filled. It's all part of just, you have to do this stuff to keep your skills sharp, to keep yourself limber enough to be able to pivot on short notice. And so I still do that stuff, and I again, fortunate. I feel very fortunate. I feel very privileged, and the world's crazy, as we talked about. And so anything you can do to make yourself just not fall into complete despair is like a total miracle,
Yeah. No, it's true. I see a lot of people kind of fall into this trap of needing their day job to be creatively fulfilling, and being angry that it's not. And I've always been of the mindset yes, try and get a job that you don't hate, but don't try and force that job to be the your only creative outlet. You're going to be miserable if that's the case. It's just
exactly,
you have to do what you need to do to pay your bills, whatever that looks like, and then just have the discipline and reserve some energy to do what you really care about on the side. And then not everyone is lucky enough to be able to be like, oh, this is the image I think is cool, and I have a huge audience, and they'll pay me so much money that I can just keep drawing whatever I want and doing whatever I want, and I know I'll have an audience to buy it. You should work towards that, obviously, but that's not a guarantee. In fact, it's, I would say, extremely rare.
Right.
So it's to try and force some day job to be your magnum opus creative outlet is a recipe for being miserable, I would say.
Totally. Yeah. And it's just I saw someone, it was it was a meme someone made, and it was on Instagram or something, but it was something along the lines of about Gen X, and it was Gen X would have a full-time job with full benefits and healthcare, and then look like this, and it was a photo of Edward Norton from Fight Club, And it's true. It's like there's a thing that was real pervasive of like, oh, I'm in the corporate world, and like because of that, I have no soul, and
Yeah.
I'm dying every day, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, the next generation might look at you and think you are so lucky. You have healthcare, like you have
Yeah.
a consistent job with a 401k or whatever,
Dude.
and those jobs are diminishing so quickly. I mean,
Yeah.
my father-in-law just had his 50-year work anniversary. He works for Delta as a mechanic.
Wow.
And I mean, 50 years, like
That's unheard of.
Unheard of at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of longevity is insane.
Yeah. 5 years is a miracle now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you're right. I think that it's important. It's also important for the creative brain to kind of give that muscle a rest. Let your brain focus on other things, and then come back to if you really are the kind of person who requires a creative outlet, then yeah, you're going to have a job, and it's most likely not going to be fun, but that's the job, that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Unless it's completely killing you in some way. I mean,
Yeah.
find another line of work, but yeah, it is weird. And again, there's a generation too. I mean, students again, going back to this, there were students I had, they were just like, would flat out say, I just want to be a TikTok influencer. Because they're seeing the kind of monetary success that these people that they follow get for virtually doing, I don't want to be a boomer here, but like doing nothing. That sounds so like judgmental. I don't mean it that way, but in that sense that they see this as like a very quick means to an end. I don't understand that. I'm sure that'll change as time, just like anything else. There's an ebb and flow, especially culturally and with the capitalist society that we live in. But it is weird. It's totally weird to be a creative person in this day and age, and like, what does that necessarily mean? What does the longevity for that look like? I try to impart that as much as I possibly can. Like, if you are the kind of person who wants to be an animator or an illustrator or graphic designer, you should also be prepared to be struggling consistently, financially and otherwise. There's also things like isolation that you don't hear about at all.
Yeah.
Like, you have to put a lot of effort into being to seeing friends and family, because by the nature of the very nature of the work, you're alone a lot. That can do some damage if you're not the kind of person with a strong enough constitution. Be prepared to understand finances, understand how taxes work, understand how contracts work. Like, these are all, so saying that you want to be an independent, employed independently or successful independently, that comes with its big hurdle too. Like, it's huge boulders you got to push up the rock. I mean, yes, being a clock watcher and doing a 9 to 5, yeah, sure, that's going to be soul sucking to a certain degree. And yes, you're going to have everything taken care of. Your taxes are taken out for you. Your healthcare is provided. It's all, grass is greener, right? Like, you're going to have your obstacles on both ends. You're going to have the pros on both ends, cons on both ends. So I don't know. Again, in my 40s, I don't know if I have it necessarily figured out. I think we're all just trying to keep our head above water at this point,
Yeah, we are in a very bizarre time in America of just, it's just so not clear what the next decade is going to look like as far as like economics, job offerings. Like, I'm optimistic that the quote unquote threat from AI, I feel like 10% of that is going to pan out and be a reality. Like, I don't, I'm not, maybe I'm being naive, but I'm not necessarily super terrified about that as a lot of people are. Although I'm sure it will cut into, it'll definitely cut into like available gigs for sure. But
sure.
But I also, I don't know. I think people can, like, there's a flavor to AI art that I think is going to be there no matter how good it gets. And I think people get sick of eating the same flavor over and over again. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
there's something about it that I'm just like, keep an eye on it, you know, but don't freak out about it. Like, I see so many like artists on Twitter or whatever, like talking about it. And I'm like, you're spending a lot of time being scared of this thing and not drawing or doing your thing.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of those people. I definitely panicked.
It was scary. It was scary. Yeah,
it was a little scary, but I think also it's the application, how it's used, and like you said it. I mean, we really don't know the full extent on how far this is really going to get us, but I remember being freaked out, and other friends of mine being freaked out, and then like just being super vocal, you know, like, we have to fight against this. And you know, fortunately, because the freelance illustration world, specifically as it pertains to publishing and editorial, very I don't want to say traditionalist, but they are people who really fight for illustrators. And so a lot of magazines, the New Yorker, these organizations in New York, American Illustration, Society of Illustrators, they all had to release public statements like, we will never, when it comes to this particular thing, we are not going to, you know, be working with anybody utilizing AI as a tool. You know, but having said that, that's a very niche thing, right? So I found that comforting, because it was like, well, okay, then I know that my job isn't at risk. But that's not to say, like, you know, animators, you know, obviously they're right now at a pretty there's a lot going on in the world of animation. So totally stand with my animator brothers and sisters, but you know, that's also another thing to worry about. You know, screenwriters, again, the application, I think it's still kind of ebbing and flowing. Who knows? I just saw the new Alien movie. They used AI for that Rook character.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, little clunky in my opinion, but that's only because the movie was mostly practical effects, and then this one, I mean, it stood out. It was just like, oh, that's AI. That's 1,000% AI. But again, maybe in that, I don't know much, but maybe in that particular production, maybe they were like, this is the only way we can make this work. But but the director's saying, but we are going to do our best to employ as many designers and production artists to make this practical. And so, give and take, ebb and flow. I don't know how, you know, what's going to happen with this. So
it's, you know, it's a strange thing being in a creative career, because you're making a product that nobody necessarily, it's not a life and death necessity to have to have the product.
No one asked for it.
So it's like, you know, part of me is like, you know, it's very hard to crack what an audience wants. I don't think an audience necessarily even knows what it wants. It's just the thing where it's like, I'm interested in doing this stuff. And you just have to keep your fingers crossed that there's an audience for it. Like it's a strange way to live your life, but
totally,
you know, it is what it is.
Exactly. We just have to keep our heads down and keep doing what we're doing, and then, you know, eventually, if we come to a crossroads, we'll cross it. I mean, but it's hard not to live your life in just like eventualities and just constantly like, but what if and what if and what if? You'll never get anything done, obviously. You know? Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Anxiety and depression are the killer of creativity. So don't let stuff like that get you down. You got to just well put. So you go back to school. You how did those early days start for you, as far as like getting clients? Like, you obviously through school you built a portfolio, so you can at least, you know, you have the evidence that you know what you're doing now. What did that look like, finding your first gigs?
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, because I feel like I'm still sort of finding, you know, my ideal sort of, I don't want to say my ideal client, but the kind of work that I really want to do. I'm still very much in that. I'll take a job if it pays and it looks fun, and yeah, let's do it. But yeah, I think it was a lot of pounding the pavement, so to speak. I mean, illustrators in the 80s and 90s, maybe even up to the early aughts, if you went to school on the West Coast or anywhere outside of New York, and that was your profession that you were going for, freelance illustration, you would be told, not asked or suggested, it was told to you, like, you have to move to New York, or you cannot make it work anywhere else. But again, this is at a time where, social media was the thing. You had to literally lug a portfolio over and to the New Yorker, to all these publication companies, the Penguin, and walk in and then just sort of hope that the art director happened to be in their office, and then hope that they happen to have 5 minutes to look at your work.
Yeah.
So it's not that extreme, but it's similar. And it was really just cold emails, constantly trying things out differently. Like, oh, I'll embed images into the email. Okay, I'll just include my website. And doing that every day for what felt like months and months and months. And it would take probably over a year for the clients to get back to me. Oh, just because they get so much. So then they get in touch with you and like, oh, we do have something for you. And it's usually a smaller gig to kind of feel you out, And then I think that just over time just sort of built. But, I officially graduated from Art Center in 2018. So at that time, it was, my wife's business had just started to blossom. And so we were really focusing on that. I was helping her a lot. And then just every day from like 6 a.m., because I knew I was accounting for New York time, get up at 6 a.m., emails, making my own work, just to send out. And then 2020 comes around, and I actually got a job working for this company that designs wallpaper called
cool.
Aztec. Yeah, and it was a really great company. They're still around. And got hired there, was really enjoying it. I got hired there in March of 2020. So was there for a few weeks, and they were like, sorry, closing down effective immediately. And you're the newest hire we have, so we have to let you go. So it was like, okay, that's fine. But as just sort of time happened, people were home, people were on the internet more, people were reading more blogs and so on and so forth. Then people were responding to my emails that I had sent out a year before. So then my freelance kicked up during that whole pandemic shutdown. Because again, it was like website revenue had gone up because people are just at home, just on their computers, on their phones. And then my clientele started to build at that point. And then so, again, I mean, I think that's just with freelancers, it's like one job begets the other, because then you start to build a bigger portfolio and more varied portfolio with different types of work. And, it wasn't easy. Obviously, it's completely like emotionally draining, because you're just like, you're alone. And so you're like, I hope this person likes what I do. They didn't write back to me. They hate me. They hate what I do. What am I going to do? Oh my God, I have bills. I have rent. Oh my God. It just, the spiral just kicks in. But just like anything, it's like, you just don't stop doing it. And then things just get gradually a little bit better. The next job pays a little bit more than the previous job. And then so on and so forth, And again, I'm still very much in my early stages. So I still haven't, fingers crossed for that Criterion collection, or something like that. Like that's sort of what I'm working towards. But, everything's a success.
That whole Criterion collection, hiring like cool like comic book people and stuff to do covers, that's really cool to me.
Yeah. One of those companies that they love their artists and designers. They put a lot of effort into making sure that everything is very unique and handcrafted. And the Eric Stillman, the art director for Criterion, I mean, he's so great at just being able to pick out somebody whose work speaks to the film that they're releasing too. But a lot of people do that. Arrow Video, Vinegar Syndrome. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
boutique. Again, physical media I think is making a big comeback. With vinyl records and
Totally.
books and that kind of thing. So
I
there
love
is
that.
work out there for freelancers.
Yeah, I love that A24 does zines to go along with
Yeah.
their movie, and they're really cool. Like,
They're really good, and I've seen some work from people whose work I admire, like show up on A24 and like whatever marketing products that they might have for that movie, and it's
Yeah.
like very well done.
yeah, I see you do a lot of stuff in magazines, and specifically, I'm dying for there to be like a magazine renaissance. Like I loved making that comic book. I love zines. I love magazines. Like there has
Yeah.
to be some kind of audience out there that we're just like,
Oh,
you know what I mean? Like I just
Totally,
refuse to
totally.
believe that like, oh, that's old fashioned and dead. And it's only about an Instagram post or whatever. Like it's like
yeah,
no,
no way. I think it's building up steam again. I think especially with young kids, I think young kids are they're getting burnt out on the glowing screen in their hand. I think they want things that they can hold, things that they can see their work in tangible form.
Yeah,
I want to ask you, how did you feel when you held your first comic? I
Oh,
mean, that
man.
feeling is just
dude.
priceless, right?
It really was a wake up call of like why haven't I done this before? Why am I like 39 and this is the first time I'm doing this? Like
Yeah,
partially it's like the voice in your head that's like, well, you're not ready yet to commit something to print. You know what I mean? Like that was kind of a thing I was dealing with. Like, oh, you have to get better first. But it's like, no, make the thing. And it's so exciting and empowering. And you immediately are like, I got to make a new one. I got to make another one. Like it was an incredible
Yeah, yeah.
experience to answer your question. It was
Yeah.
it was like a lightning strike, exciting.
Totally, exactly. And that's the feeling you just want to keep chasing. I mean, it's also, obviously preaching to the choir here, but it's like, and it becomes an object, an heirloom in a sense. Like it lives in the world with you physically.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about that, and that doesn't knock things that are, I mean, I work digitally, and a lot of the clients that I get are just online. I work with the culture, lifestyle, sports website called The Ringer, and they don't have a print segment. It's all online.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily negate the work. I mean, I still work just as hard on that stuff. The artists that they choose to work with are also really great. But it doesn't beat, if I were to get something, physical. I did a poster for a DVD or a Blu-ray release of Talk to Me, the A24 horror movie. And it was through the Australian company called Umbrella Entertainment. And they sent me the box set once. It was included in a little booklet with other artwork. But again, as soon as I received that and looked at it, I was like, this is amazing. I want more of this, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's true. I know what you're saying as far as like print versus like, oh, it's just a website. But to be honest, even just having, I would also like to see more like, oh, this is a website I go to and hang out on that has content I enjoy. Like that's also a rarity at this point, which is bizarre to me. Like, I feel like everyone has just like given the keys to these social media companies. I'm like, it does not have to be that. Like, it really doesn't.
Exactly.
Like, I get that, like, that's where your audience is, but like, that shouldn't be the end. That shouldn't be like the end goal where the product sits. It should be, here's what's happening over here. Come follow me from this social media to the real thing. Like, I think that's a smarter way to go for the future. I mean, it's definitely difficult. It's difficult to get people to, basically follow you somewhere else. But I really think like going back to that old school, like building like an email list of people you can just directly talk to. There's no algorithm getting in front of you and communicating with a person who cares about what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, those are the things I've been thinking about, all because I printed a comic book, and I'm like, physical is awesome. It's exciting. Yeah. I'm now obsessed with like, could I curate a really cool zine with like art and articles and short stories and stuff like that? Like the only way, you
Absolutely.
just have to make the things you want to see in the world, you know? Like
yep. Couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly, like, you just make the stuff you want to see in the world. You make the stuff that you would be excited. That's exactly how I approach everything I make. Like, if I saw this on a bookshelf at some small boutique store or gallery or whatever, I want to make something that I would get excited and be like, this is awesome. I'm taking this home right now,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I like you said, like, I just feel like we're just on the cusp of this thing, like this renaissance of like people actually being excited about interesting niche things that aren't necessarily like, that aren't created by an assembly at like Walt Disney Corporation or whatever. Yeah. Like, like, I think people are getting hungry again for something like that. And I honestly think that all this weird economic stuff is kind of gonna force that. Like, I can see like they're starting to be smaller budget movies again because you can't afford to make a huge budget movie. And that alone would be like, amazing to just have like, these studios like take risks on younger, newer people because it's only $10 million instead of $100 million or whatever. And it forces the creativity into a whole nother level, I think, too. Yeah. I'm hopeful that we're going to start seeing that. And I think finally the conversation around social media for like even like a normal person is like, oh, this is not a good use of time or something, or this isn't the ideal way to look at something. I think just have to just keep making stuff, people. Like, that's really literally all there is. Like, just keep making what you think is cool and don't give up hope. Like, something's coming around the bend. There's some kind of thing in the air where something has to give, something has to change, because nobody likes how it's working right now, even if they don't fully realize it. Again, that audience thing of like the audience not necessarily knowing what they want, like nobody was like loudly being like describing a David Lynch movie and being like, why isn't there something like this? No, it took David Lynch to make the thing. They're like, whoa, this is awesome.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Let's talk about your process. I watched you had like a process video on your Instagram. Tell me if you tell me if this doesn't sound right, but like I look at your stuff and I think it's like a digital painting is how I would describe it, and I'm interested in your process of doing gray values first, because I don't think I think artsy type people know that, but I don't think, the general hobbyist artist might not know that that's a good way for like building, what's the word? Like readability in your images, value. Oh, sure. Yeah. So let's just talk a little bit about your process.
Yeah, totally. I feel like traditionally I operate primarily as a painter. So even when I'm working digitally, I still kind of follow how I would approach it if I were actually just painting on canvas. And that includes that traditional approach of you kind of create your, you establish your value system, your darks and your mids and your lights and so on and so forth before doing anything else. It's funny because digital work is still fairly new to me, and I I don't watch tutorials on digital painting, or I don't do anything. I feel like maybe if a traditional like digital painter were to see how I work, they might be like, you're insane. Like none of this is the right way to do it. But that's okay because it just works for me. But yeah, that's essentially it. I mean, I put that time lapse up just because sometimes it's just fun to just see how how a thing goes from the beginning to the end. Although I do think it can be a little dangerous, especially with young people, and they see that, and it makes it, it kind of gives them a sort of false notion on how something is created. Because even though a time lapse just makes it look effortless, right? Yeah. It looks like this. Look at this person and they're genius, and they just they whip this thing out, and it's like, yeah, but also that could have been their 80th take on that time lapse, Yeah. So, yeah. Again, I think I like to just approach things in a very natural way, and so I try to use, even when it's a digital program, I try to find like brushes and tools and that look really traditional and operate that way. But again, my personal preference is always going to be pencil to paper and oil and canvas. Although I don't have the time to do that stuff anymore. In fact, I just gave a close friend of mine who's a really beautiful painter, I just gave her all my oils and brushes because I was like, I have no time to get painting at all right now, and I don't want this stuff to go to waste, so just take it and like put it to use, but again, still, when I'm working digitally, I have a Wacom 22-inch Wacom Cintiq, and then I also have the iPad. Like, even if I'm working digitally, I try to approach it as though I were approaching it like paper or canvas or whatever. And I don't know enough about digital art to know if that's the way that other digital artists do it or approach it. I have no clue, but it seems to work for me,
Yeah.
But I like it so far. The piece you picked out earlier, that was done, and I don't do this practice anymore, but for a while what I would do was I would flesh out everything on paper with graphite, acrylic ink, and some and some regular acrylic paint, and then I would scan that, and then I would edit digitally and kind of like fix floods and add things and that sort of thing. So that particular piece that you pulled up was the last one I actually did that approach with, where that piece is the true mixed media, where it's an acrylic painting scanned and then enhanced digitally. And I don't know why I would do that. I think at the time it just sort of felt like, well, I still want it to feel organic, even if the output in the end is going to be digital. I want there to, and maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just like for me to know, like at least I know that there's some organic elements in it. Yeah. But maybe to the general audiences, it might not be that noticeable. But yeah, I enjoy it, and I think there was a short period where I started to feel like, well, if I don't include some traditional methods into the digital work, then I'm like playing it too safe. Like, I don't want to just do digital. Like, I want to see how I can make this sort of work. And then after a while, I started to realize, I think I'm just giving myself more work because I think in the end, it's still going to look the same, like I'm still using it's still my practice and my approach. So I quickly stopped doing that, but, or not quickly, I shouldn't say that. It took a little while. But that piece was the last one I did that with. And then since then, all my client work is all digital. But again, that's just the nature of quick turnarounds and deadlines. Yeah. Our friend Brian, who recommended me for this, who you just interviewed, he's also one of those people who I'm in constant awe of, because he's just graphite artist, and he's got consistent work, and he just he belts those things out so quickly.
He does.
That's a real niche practice. A lot of people are unable to do that kind of thing, and especially so quickly. Yeah. I couldn't bust out a graphite drawing that quickly. I have a long process of getting a real strong piece on paper before I scan it in and work on it digitally. But that's something I've always admired in Brian. When I first met him, when we first met, I was like, how do you do it? This is incredible. I've been, we've been following each other's work for a long time. But yeah, so sorry, I might have gotten away from your original question. That's my process. Digital work is essentially what I just kind of do now, but that's just because I'm working with clients.
Yeah.
And then I just to keep my skill set sharp, I still carry around a sketchbook and do everything with pen and pencil and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I work primarily as a video editor, so I try to do as much on pen and ink just so I'm not staring at a screen more. And I didn't similarly I didn't like transition to do into doing digital until more recently, and also just for like it is much faster, like it just is. But I get what you're saying, like that pull of wanting it to be, I don't know if it's like, it's more authentic if you did it on pen. Like, I mean,
totally ego.
Part of the back of my mind is telling myself that, and I but it's like, it's tricky. Lately I've been experimenting with doing, like, if I'm doing like a comic book art style thing of like line art plus color or whatever. Mm-hmm. I've been doing the pencils in digitally, and then printing those out on Bristol board, and then inking traditionally. And
nice.
I've also been experimenting with poster color. It's like in between gouache and watercolor, kind of. And doing basically like the blue line process of doing line art, and then the inks or the colors separately, and then combining them in Photoshop. And,
right.
And I use digital to like you said, fix any mistakes, because I never want to like break out a bottle of white out and try and fix a line on like that sounds like a nightmare. Like, just go into Photoshop. Nobody will care or know. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, just
I love it though. I had a teacher he's been working as an illustrator for decades, and he would bring in his old pieces that would be published in magazines. And obviously this predates any kind of program, and you could see, the sort of the border lines, the gutter, everything's drawn in with a pencil, taped off properly. He talks about that a lot but it's not white out, it's just like white acrylic or white gesso to adjust mistakes. And it's to my millennial eyes, I'm like, this is insane. Like, how you made this beautiful piece in a matter of 48 hours to get published in a magazine, and have it, the colors, everything, the value system is all set for reproduction, because that's another thing too, right? Certain colors don't photograph well, so everything has to be really in line for reproduction purposes. Obviously we don't deal with that anymore because everything's done digitally, but to what you're saying about your process, I just think it's just whatever is fun, right? I mean, process is just, that's such a personal thing. That's why I can never watch tutorials, or it's to me, a process is just how it's a thing. How do you work out? Like, what does it matter? Like, in the end, I'm still working out and I'm healthy. The end product is it's there, it's present. How I got there shouldn't really matter as much. Sure, some processes might be more impressive than others, but in the end, I don't even think that most people really pay much attention to that necessarily. I probably will have painter friends of mine who watch this and be really mad and screaming at the screen for saying that, but it is true. I mean, a process is personal. You do whatever you want, spray paint on a wall, take a photo of that, put it in a Photoshop, do something, it doesn't matter. It's
whatever gets you there in the end, like, and that is sustainable, that you can,
exactly.
That's interesting. I'm in the same exact place of, like, for whatever reason, honoring traditional more than I would digital, even though I know if I just went full digital, it would be so much easier. Like,
sure. But then you would start to miss, traditional. Like that's just like how it works, right?
Yeah, it's true. I am trying to get faster, just because like you got to be consistent. Like you just have to be disciplined, have good work ethic, like you were saying earlier, and just sitting down and doing the work. And
yep.
Yeah. And
I never stop experimenting with processes,
Yeah. I do things a little differently not each time, but like I actively experiment with like, what if I did it this way this time, and see how the end result works. Yeah. Speed is definitely important. Like you're saying about Brian Lutz, like, especially if you have a client,
oh yeah,
being able to get fast is a good thing.
Exactly.
Listen, this was really interesting, and I quite enjoyed talking to you.
Yes, this was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Let's wrap up. Let's. I did really quickly.
Sure.
Wanted to ask Maxfield Parrish. You singled him out, and Roland. Is it Topor?
Topor. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
I just what you highlighted them on your site, so I'm just curious. I didn't know them by name, but when I looked them up, I'm like, oh, I've seen that Blue Alien movie, and
sure.
I've definitely seen some of Maxfield Parrish's work. Super awesome. I see what the things you're pulling and stuff, but like I just curious what your thoughts are on those two.
Yeah, I think that I put that on my website. I think that was from, oh my gosh, I'm gonna feel really bad. I can't remember this, but it was from a brief introduction for a piece that was done on me for Communication Arts magazine. So those weren't my words. Those were a comparison that were used to describe my work. But I mean, I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense because I love both of those artists.
Gotcha.
But yeah, there's other people too. Maxfield Parrish. I mean, I don't know. I think I get this a lot, and I'm only assuming this is all pure conjecture and assumption. But I think the reason I get that comparison is just because the work they create is both visually dark. Mm-hmm. I use a lot of blacks with like pops of color and light.
That's what I was.
And then also aesthetically, like subject matter, I think. So people are like, oh, it's so like moody or whatever, and I'm like, oh,
also
sure,
very crisp lines as well.
Yeah, right, very sharp, and that's just how I operate. But I think that's where the comparison comes from. But I do love Roland Topor. I love Fantastic Planet is one of my favorites. It's just such a crazy animation French movie. And again, Maxfield, I mean, I didn't start liking Maxfield until I started going to school and started learning more about traditional like the forefathers of illustration, as they're referred to. But I like I don't know what I can say specifically what I like about Maxfield Parrish, but I do love their work. I also love people like this guy Brad Holland, who started off as doing a lot of work for like Playboy in the 70s, like illustration work. When Playboy had really good articles written by like these really impressive writers, Yeah. But Brad Holland, same thing. Lots of crisp black, lots of just like the picture plane is black, and then little things kind of pop out from there. I've always loved that sort of thing.
Yeah, cool.
I just like the idea of kind of having to work a little hard to be like, what am I looking at again? And which is not a thing that illustrators are trained to do, because you're supposed to have a fast read, right? It's supposed to be something that's really instantly grabs you, bright colors, that kind of thing. And I'm like, nah, I mean, that's great. I love that stuff, but I'm just going to stick to this. I kind of doing it this way.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, your images are very striking. Like they feel, I don't think they're hard to read necessarily, but I I quite enjoy them. Again,
you.
that one I singled out, I just think looks so badass. It almost feels like could be like a still from Akira or something. Like,
nice.
Like
Yeah,
it just feels
absolutely.
like it's some explosion just went off in some cyberpunk future, and we're seeing the bad guy.
Yeah, it's that dramatic lighting, which I love. But yeah, thank
the
you
lighting
for saying that.
is fantastic in your stuff. Yeah, that's partially why I was like asking about gray value earlier, because I think you're just very good at like laying out lighting like that. It looks great.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you as far as like career wise. Like it's like you're keeping your fingers crossed the trajectory stays the way it should.
Exactly. Well, hey, we'll just be each other's cheerleaders.
Yeah, there you go. Well, this was great talking to you. Let's wrap up for real. Sorry, no more last second questions.
Sure. Thank you so much. This was super fun.
Yeah, thank you. We should catch up again in the future, and I'll
Absolutely
share your links in the podcast description and YouTube as well, so people can find you. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Micah. Great meeting you, and we'll be in touch.
Awesome.